Hello and welcome back to the show. Today is episode 598, and today I'm really excited to have my new friend, Richard Capriola, here with me. Richard has been a mental health and addictions counselor for over 2 decades. He recently retired from Menninger Clinic in Houston, where he worked with adolescents and adults diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse issues. He's the author of a new book titled The Addicted Child: A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Welcome, Rick. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I really appreciate you setting aside this time for us to talk about my book and this issue of adolescent substance abuse. So, thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here with me talking about this really important issue, which I think is stressful, overwhelming, and scary for parents. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. It is overwhelming and very scary for parents, and that's what prompted me to write this book, was to give them a resource, basic information in a very short document. It only runs about 100 pages, but it is packed with a lot of information that will help parents understand this issue a little bit better. And knowledge is power. So
Mm.
the more you understand this, perhaps my hope is that parents will read this book, they will walk away thinking that they've got this, they understand it a little bit better, they know the warning signs to look for. And if they're confronted with a child that's using a substance, they have resources to know where to turn for help. And most importantly, I wanted to transmit the feeling that there is hope out there, that if you have a child that is using a substance, there is help, there is hope. But the most important thing is to recognize the warning signs, be educated, be knowledgeable about what adolescent substance abuse is, and hopefully to feel a little bit more confident that if you're confronted with this issue, you have the resources to be able to deal with it in a way that will help your child and help your family.
So let's start with talking about being proactive. I know that I have listeners who have toddlers to teens and beyond.
Yeah.
So what what age do you think it is good for parents? What age of the child is it good for parents to start thinking about potential substance use and becoming educated on it and even talking to their kids about it?
Well, it's never too early to become educated about it. The younger the child, I would say, the more you should set aside some time to learn about adolescent substance abuse, just to get the basic information. I kept my book to 100 pages. If a parent reads that book, they can very quickly get the basics down about adolescent substance abuse. So the first recommendation is just read and become informed about this issue as early in your child's life as you can. The second recommendation is begin to develop and foster that good communication with your child, so that they will feel comfortable talking to you about issues that they're dealing with in their life. And the way that you can start to develop that good communication is to practice good listening skills. And by that, I mean that we're pretty good at listening to other people's words when they talk to us. So when our child is talking to us, we hear their words, but oftentimes we don't hear the feelings behind those words. And that's a skill that every parent can learn and every parent can practice, so that when their child is talking to them or we're in a conversation with our child, we're hearing not just their words, but we're hearing the feelings. If you can lay that foundation from a very early age, you may very well set the foundation that down the road, as they go into their preteen and teenage years, will pay tremendous dividends in their ability to work with you and talk to you, and your ability as a parent to be more involved in their life. Help them to feel that when they're talking to you, that you're hearing their feelings as well as their words.
Oh, that's such good advice, and I could not agree more. It makes me think of a conversation I had with my son just yesterday. He's in college, and it's not about substance abuse or use, but it's really about hearing what's behind his words.
Mhm.
He called me and he said that his girlfriend wanted him to go to a baseball game, but he didn't have any money in his account. And I said, "Well, are you calling to ask me to give you money so you can go to the game?" And he said, "Yeah, or I'm asking you to just say no because I don't really feel like going anyway." And I thought that was really interesting. And I said, "Well, I mean, I'm willing to give you money to go buy the ticket, or I can say no, whatever you prefer." And then what came out of it was a disagreement that the two of them were having. And I ended up helping them work through that. But if I hadn't been able to hear something that was behind, sense that there was something behind those words, that conversation wouldn't have evolved.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's great advice for any conversation that we're having with our kids, no matter what their age is and no matter what the topic is.
And that's a very excellent example of how, when a parent has developed the skill to listen beyond the words to the underlying issues and the feelings, that it may very well open up a completely different dimension to what the child is talking about and get to the real core issues. And I would encourage every parent to practice that skill, to learn that skill, because it's a skill that every parent can learn. It does take practice and it takes time, but every parent can learn that skill.
Definitely. And one of the things that I kind of jokingly tell parents is that they need to work on their poker face. So you were talking about having good listening skills. Part of, I think, especially as a parent, I mean, I think humans in general could improve their listening skills because it's rare that you come upon someone who really is a good listener. But if we want to talk about becoming better listeners with our kids, if we're listening to something our kids are telling us and they tell us something that could be upsetting for us or shocking to us, or we'd be unhappy about it or disappointed by it, if we have a big reaction to what they tell us, that's going to decrease the chances that they're going to tell us the next thing that they need to tell us, or that we would hope that they would tell us. And so I really encourage parents to not only practicing listening to their kids, but also listening with a straight face and trying really hard not to go, "Wow, you did what? You said what? You went where?" Because then when we do that, they're not going to want to tell us anymore.
Oh, and they're very good at picking up those cues too, those facial expressions, even the tone of of our words. So that's really good advice. We need to practice how we're speaking, and not just the words, but how we're expressing it, the emotions behind it, because it can have an impact on how kids receive the messages that we're sending.
So true. So what suggestions or advice or wisdom could you share with parents whose kids are, double digits, maybe 10, 11, 12, preteen, heading into middle school, when some of this might start floating around out there in the world, in their world?
My advice is, learn the warning signs, what you should be looking for. Because so many times I would sit across from a parent and I would go through their child's history of using substances, what age it began, what substances they were using, how often they were using, and I would give them the diagnosis of a substance use disorder. And after hearing all of that information, they would look across the room at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or if
Mm,
they did suspect their child was using a substance, they would look at me and they would say, well, I sort of thought something was going on, but I had no idea it was this bad. So my advice is, as your child moves into those preteen and teenage years, be aware of what the warning signs are that you should look for. I mean, these were not bad parents. They felt guilty. They felt like they missed the warning signs, but no one ever told them what the warning signs were to look for. So in my book, I have stressed the warning signs. I have warning signs for alcohol use. I have warning signs for marijuana use. I have warning signs for a child that might be developing an eating disorder. I have warning signs for a child that might be self-injuring themselves, because sometimes an eating disorder and self-injury will accompany a child's use of alcohol and drugs. So I
mhm.
have these warning signs throughout this book. And my advice to parents is, learn the warning signs, know what to look for. Don't become paranoid about it, but educate yourself on the warning signs. And in particular, pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. So when you see these changes, don't assume that they're just normal adolescent acting out. They may very well be that, but they also might be an indicator that there's something else going on under the surface. So when you see these changes, and pay attention to how long these changes last. There's a difference if you see a child acting out and a little bit different over a day or two than if it lasts for days and weeks. And also pay attention to the number of warning signs that you see. The more warning signs you see, the more concerned you should be. And as you see these warning signs, then the next move is to first have a discussion with your child and see what information you can get from the child. That's likely to go one of two ways. It's either going to blow up and become an argument and the child will become defensive, or you may actually learn some information. But regardless of how it goes, the next step is to get the assessments done that I recommend in the book, so that as a parent, you get a comprehensive view of what's going on with your child.
So can you give us a couple of the basic or major warning signs that might jump out if parents were looking for each
Sure.
of those different things?
Yeah, sure. I think overall, you want to pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. For example, you may have a child who was earning very good grades and now the grades are starting to slip. You may have a child that used to participate and enjoy sports and no longer wants to participate in sports. You may have a child that was very outgoing and social, now becomes very quiet and isolating. You may have a child who introduced you to their friends. You knew who their friends were. You may have even known who their family members were. Now becomes very secretive of who their friends are. These are example of some of the changes that you can see in your child that you want to follow up on and see what's really going on behind the scenes.
Those are some really good ones. And I think it's really good advice for parents to just be mindful of the changes that are happening. Now, our kids will always grow and change. So
Yeah.
that change is a natural part of them, especially when they hit the teen and tween years. Change is natural and normal. But learning how to tune into what might be a normal, expected part of growing up, that kind of change versus what is a little beyond what would be normal and expected. I think
Yes.
that's really important.
And because parents aren't experts in all of this, sometimes it's good to have the advice of professionals that can guide you as to whether, okay, this is normal acting out, temporary behavior type of things that we see many times in adolescence, or this is something that perhaps a little bit more severe that we need to look into.
Mhm. So we covered proactive things we can do as parents when our kiddos are little from a young age, and how to look for possible warning signs and be aware of changes that are not necessarily good normal changes.
Mhm.
And then what can you offer to parents who might find themselves with a child who's already started experimenting with substances?
Well, the first thing to do is to get the assessments done. And I list in my book several different assessments that you should rely on as a parent. For example, you will need an addictions assessment. That's what I was doing with teenagers, so that you get a comprehensive view of what your child has been doing with substances. What substances have they been using? There may be substances they were using that you were totally unaware of. And you'll also get a history on the extent of their use, and you'll get a diagnosis. You'll also need a psychological evaluation, a psychological or a neuropsychological assessment to see if there's any underlying issues that might be contributing to your child's use of a substance. Many of the teenagers that I worked with who were smoking marijuana, when I asked them to help me understand why they were smoking so much marijuana, the answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety. So
Mm.
you may have a child who has anxiety that they're dealing with that you were unaware of, or you may thought there's a little anxiety, but you didn't think it was this bad. There may be some depression going on. There might be some bullying going on that you're not aware of. So the psychological or the neuropsychological assessment will give you good feedback as to whether or not any of those issues are going on. And then you also will need like a good comprehensive physical exam to make sure that there's not anything medically going on as well. So there's a number of assessments that I've outlined. That should be the first step. That should be your first thing that you get done, so that you get the information that you need as a parent to make decisions on what the next steps should be.
And then what are some of those possible next steps?
That depends on the assessments. It depends on whether or not there's an underlying issue that's contributing to your child's use of a substance like anxiety. Because if you find that there are these other issues, you will need treatment for both the substance use and the underlying treatment. Doesn't do any good to, very much good, to treat a child for a marijuana use if I don't do something to help them with the anxiety that's driving the marijuana use. And then in terms of treatment, there is no one treatment that fits every child. It very much depends on the diagnoses and the overall picture of the child. Some children will do very well in an outpatient program where they see somebody maybe once a week. Others will need what we call an intensive outpatient program where they may see somebody several times a week. And then for some children where the underlying issue is rather severe, the anxiety is severe, the depression is severe, the self-injury is severe, as well as the substance abuse, they may be looking at some type of residential program that could be anywhere from weeks to months. So once the assessments are done and the treatment plan is outlined, then the next move will be to find the treatment that matches the diagnoses.
This all sounds like such great advice. And I'm really glad that you wrote this book, because it seems like just such a wonderful little companion, a powerful companion for parents to feel empowered and maybe less fearful about
I hope
raising their
so.
kids.
I hope so. That was my intent. And in the book, I have these resources. I have questions, for example, that parents should ask a potential treatment provider, or if your child is going to a program, I have a list of questions that parents should ask so that they get the information they need to make decisions. Um, because the goal of this book, in addition to educating parents, is to give them a sense of hope, to give them a sense of realizing that they and their family and their child can get through this together, but they are going to need resources and they are going to need help. Just a basic understanding of adolescent substance abuse and what's available in the event that they need it. And then the other advice I would give to parents is, if you're going through this with your child, get some help for yourself as well, because you as a parent will need support. You will need encouragement and help. Perhaps it's another family member, or perhaps it's a spouse, or perhaps it's a good friend, or it might be a counselor. But my suggestion is, make sure that you're taking care of yourself and you're getting the support that you need to go through this, as well as the support that your child needs.
I could not agree with you more. I always tell parents it is so important to in order for us to be the parent that we want to be and for us to be the parent that our children deserve, we have to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
And so, especially when you're going through a stressful time, such as you find out your child is using a substance, you must find support for yourself because it's not easy. It's doable and you can get through it and your child can get through it, but it's going to be a lot easier if you have a support system wrapped around you as well as your child.
It will be much easier if you have that support system wrapped around you because you're going to need it. It's going to be very stressful. You're going to have questions about how good a parent you've been, and as your child goes through treatment, there will be ups and there will be downs. So you need to get the support lined up that will help you and your family as your child goes through, hopefully, a process of getting better and improving.
Yes. Well, I love that when you and I first connected talking about this topic in your book, we talked about how important we both felt it was to provide hope for parents and to ease their fear, reduce their fear around this very scary topic.
Yeah.
And I really would strongly encourage parents who are listening to get a copy of your book so that they can be informed and empowered and feel less fearful and feel more ready to be the parent that their kids need and deserve them to be.
That's a good summary of why I wrote the book.
So where can people find a copy of your book?
The book, which is titled, as you mentioned in the introduction, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. There's also an accompanying parent workbook that I would encourage people to get because I wrote that to help parents. And it has a number of exercises that I hope parents will find helpful. Both are available on Amazon. You can also go to the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com. And on the website, you can read endorsements and some book reviews. There will also be a link that will take you directly to Amazon where you can order the book. It's available in either electronic version for people who like to read on their Kindle, or there's a paperback version that's available as well. And I have priced it to be very affordable. You can get the Kindle version for 99 cents.
That's fantastic. And you brought up a very good point when we were talking earlier before we hit record, that if there is a question or a scenario that a parent has or is struggling with that we haven't covered and helped them with here today during our discussion, that they can just send an email to me. You can send an email to me with your question or your concern, and Rick and I will be happy to come back on a future episode to discuss that question or issue. So just send me an email if there's anything we haven't covered already.
Yes, and I appreciate you making that offer. I think there may be issues, particular issues that parents are interested in, or perhaps questions that they have. If they will send those to you, we can have another session where we can address their specific concerns and questions. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Fabulous. Well, this has been really fun, Rick. I really appreciate your time and coming on the podcast with me. And I really feel like we have given parents some really, really important information about how they can prevent their kids from developing any kind of substance abuse problem. And if their kids already have, more powerful tools to help them navigate that. And certainly your book is one of them. And I hope that they will pick that copy up as soon as they can.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and it's my pleasure. All right, so that wraps up today's episode. Wherever you are in this world, I hope that you make it a very informative day for yourself.